Over to you, Pedro.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you for this invitation to address the European School of Theosophy on the subject of the life and work of Radha Burnier. As you know, I did work at IDR in the early 1990s and for 4.5 years, and subsequently in the year 2000s for a briefer period. So I had an opportunity to work with her closely. Um, I would like to say a few words about her childhood first. And I selected only one. I'm not very good in sharing PowerPoint slides, but I'll try. This is the only photograph of her that I would like to show. It is a photograph of her with her little brother Vasant, her mother Bhagirathi, and her father Sri Ram, who was one of the great influences in her life. But I would like to draw attention that this little girl, she was probably 4 or 5 here. Even at that very young age, she did have a kind of a glance in her eyes, and which she would demonstrate later in life. She was a very active person. She did a lot of work for the Theosophical Society and for animals as well. She was the founder of the Besant Memorial Animal Dispensary. Um, she did care for the animals on the compound. Some resident thought that accepting uh, uh, vagrant dogs would be a nuisance, and she used to tell us, if you consider the kind of life that these animals have had outside, we shouldn't call it a nuisance for us. They have reached a safe haven in their lives. She also mentioned to me a very popular Tamil saying that said, "Oh, what a pity. Whenever I see a dog, I don't have a stone in my hand." So, unfortunately, cruelty to animals is a widespread reality in the world, including India. All right. Um, so she was born in 1923. She also told me that she remembered as a little girl Annie Besson walking on the compound at that yard as an elderly lady. She also met other stalwarts of the TS, and um, she was educated in theosophical schools. One particular memory she shared with me was that when the classes were over, she and other young students would delight to walk through the compound, particularly what is called Besant Gardens, the other side of the compound. And they used to stare at the big wells where water is stored for the compound, particularly during the monsoon period. And she said she was delighted to see the depth of the well and the reflections on the water. She also shared that as a young student, um, she saw this foreigner called Felix Layton, who would later become a very influential theosophist in the American section, and also traveling with his wife Eunice Layton practically around the world. When he arrived in Madras, his suitcase was lost temporarily, so he didn't have clothes, but he was there to teach to the students of the Awkward School. And then the solution found by the administrators was to give him a dhoti, which is a very traditional cloth that men wrap around their waist. But when the students saw him dressed in a dhoti, they started laughing hysterically because they had never seen a Western dressed in a dhoti. Anyhow, her education proceeded from school to college, and then she became a student of the Benares Hindu University, which was formed thanks to the generosity and vision of Dr. Annie Besant. And she graduated as in a master's degree in Sanskrit as number one in her class. And therefore she became very knowledgeable in Sanskrit, and this was something that held her in good stead all her life, not only as um, director of the Adyar Library, but also as president of the society. She contributed with her unique knowledge of Sanskrit to the meaning of certain important Sanskrit words. I am myself a witness of this, and I said to her, I have found this expression in the Bhagavad Gita, stita prajna, and the translation given is stable mind. So I said to her, so I understand that the word prajna in Sanskrit may mean mind, consciousness, or even wisdom. But what is your definition of the word stita? She looked at me and she said, immovable. So stita prajna is a mind that goes through experiences in an unshaken way. It's not brought down. It's not shaken. And it's not changed by experiences. It has its own equilibrium. So that was the culmination of her education process. But she also studied in the Kalakshetra School of Fine Arts under Rukmini Devi, where she learned Bharatnatyam. It's a very important classic Indian dance form, which Rukmini Devi rescued from ill reputation at that time, because the young women who danced Bharatnatyam near temples, they didn't have a good reputation according to Indian society at that time. But Rukmini researched this thoroughly, and she found out that it was a very fine form of dance. So she learned that, she rehearsed, learned, and she had a number of um, presentations of that. So Radha studied there, and she herself became a very fine Bharatnatyam exponent. So much so that in the archives at Adyar, there is a newspaper cutting with a review of one of her presentations, in which and the subject of that article was a jewel of the nation. They said that her dance was so sublime that that's the title they gave to her, of course, journalistically speaking. And because she became very famous, she was approached by the producers of um, the film The River, which was directed by the very well-known and respected director Jean Renoir. And so they wanted her to act in the film. And she has a very beautiful dance scene, which in her mind, she had been betrothed to this young Indian man, and she saw him in her imagination as Sri Krishna, and she imagined herself to be Radha, because the connection between Radha and Krishna is very well established in Indian scriptures. But there was a problem. The producers said to her, she told me she has crooked teeth. So the producers said to her, Radha, before we start filming, we have to fix your teeth for the camera. And she was a young woman of 25 approximately, moving around this entourage of directors, producers, cameramen, and so on. And she told this producer, you will take me as I am or not at all. In the sense that she wouldn't be submitted or subjected to dental treatment just to appear in the film. So she told me that the producers, because they consider her technique excellent of Bharatanatyam, the producer, they had organized the filming and the camera angle to avoid showing her crooked teeth, which is almost like an absurdity nowadays, and she fought valiantly for her right to preserve her own teeth. The film was a great success worldwide. She told me as well that she attended a number of premiere sessions for the film around the world with the director and his wife and other cast members. And as a result of that, she came to know a photographer who was also involved in the film. His name was Raymond Burnier, and they decided to get married in Los Angeles. She was still in her 20s, and she told me that after they got married, she sent a telegram to her father, mind you, an Indian father, N. Sri Ram. Father, I have got married in Los Angeles. That was a cable or a telegram. There were no text messages in those days. Of course, Sri Ram was a different man. He didn't scolded her on anything. He trusted her discernment. But the marriage was not to last long, and they parted ways in 1959. They got married in 1953 and parted company in 1959. The reason why is that Mr. Burnier wanted to go back to Switzerland, his native country. And she said, I'm not going. I'm going to stay here. My father is elderly and he needs my help. So that was it. They got separated. And as part of the divorce settlement, she said she got a pension, which if she had to live in Switzerland, she would be a pauper. But because of exchange rates in India, she could live a comfortable life and therefore dedicate her life to theosophy. That was the end of an era in her life. After that time, she became the director of the Ardea Library and Research Center. She helped to produce a number of scholarly texts from the Upanishad collection and other texts, the Tamil palm leaf manuscripts. She worked with very important and dedicated pundits, including Dr. K. Raja and Ramachandra Sharma and so on. She also mentioned to me that you cannot force these pundits to observe deadlines. Their work will be done when it's done. You have to give them space. This idea of deadlines doesn't work for them. Probably because, according to the Indian tradition, time is one of the artifacts of Maya or illusion. She did a lot of work there. Then she was asked to be General Secretary of the Indian section. The Indian section was going through certain difficulties at that time. She was a young woman and she did a good work. She was General Secretary of the Indian section for 18 years and traveled extensively through India and so on. It was in the capacity of General Secretary of the Indian section that she attended the World Congress of the TS in Salzburg in Austria. And that was one of the last Congress with so many celebrities and stalwarts like Geoffrey Hodgson, Clara Cord, and Leslie Smith, and John Coates, and many others. Over the years, I have heard the remark that Radha Burnier didn't have a sense of humor. I don't agree, because she did share some humorous stories with me. One of them is that after the Congress, she needed to go to Switzerland because she was still a Swiss citizen. She kept that citizenship because it would be easier for her to travel internationally. And John Coates offered her a ride to Switzerland. After all, Austria, Salzburg is located in Austria. Austria is near Switzerland. So they traveled together. John Coates had to stop in a small village in Austria to refuel the car. And you can imagine John Coates, he was 6'4", wearing a tweed jacket, like many Indian gentlemen. Radha Burnier was wearing her sari and a cardigan. And she was much smaller than him. She was probably 5'4", 5 foot high or something. So she came to John Coates and she said, "Everybody is looking at us." And John Coates said, "Probably they think that we have eloped." And she had an amusing smile when she said that. She was not in a humorous mood very often. As a matter of fact, she didn't suffer fools gladly, and she did have a temper. Those of us who have worked with her know that. But her great capacity was she could scold you very strongly one day, but the next day, if you needed to talk to her, she was ready to listen to you again. So there was no grudge carried on from yesterday, so to speak. When her father died on the 3rd of April, 1973, she decided to offer herself as a candidate for president. There were other candidates as well, and one of them was John Coates. Another one was Jim Perkins, and Rukmini Devi Arundale. There were 4 candidates. And John Coates ended up elected president. Of course, in every electoral process, there are always some sort of criticisms or or non-acceptance of results and so on. But the fact is that the election committee, on the basis of votes received at ADR, declared him elected. So John Coates was elected president, and he was president from 1973 to 1979 when he passed away at ADR. He had a fulminating heart attack. And then, of course, the two major candidates for the election after John Coates' passing were Rukmini Devi Arundale, Radha Burnier's aunt, and Radha Burnier herself. And the votes were cast, and she won very convincingly and became the 7th president of the TS. And she did a lot of work. She did a lot of work for ADR. She told me that one of her most difficult tasks would be to free the Occult school from the influence of the central government in India. Somebody had suggested to John Coates that if he associated the Occult school to the central government, to the Department of Education, there would be some funds. But Radha Burnier said to me, we all know that whenever there is political funding, behind the funding comes political influence. And as a result of that, the central government was appointing the teachers for the Occult school, the absolute majority of whom didn't know anything about the philosophy or the purposes of the TS. So she worked very hard, and eventually she disentangled the Occult school from the central government in India, and she tried to build funds for the future of the school. She also gave attention to ADR. One of the great influences in her life, besides her own father and Sri Ram, was J. Krishnamurti. They were good friends. And she told me that once she said, ADR is a sacred place. You must look after it. And she said that she took that as her job in that life, as her mission, so to speak. And she did, and she had this constant admiration for ADR. There were days in which she would leave her car at the president's office and she would walk from the headquarters building to her house. I accompanied her on some occasions, and I could see how connected she was with everything at ADR, with animals, mongooses, plants, trees. She would give instructions to the garden department about particular plants and so on. In some of these encounters, she also gave me some practical, I would say, instructions or suggestions. She said, if the ego has flared up once, that means it's going to flare up again, unless one observes a great deal of awareness and attention. Another advice she gave me was that no matter what people say, you are what you are. And she included herself in this advice. She said, if we look within, we will see a great deal of work to be done in our emotions, intent, motives, reactions, memories, and so on. Of course, every president in the TS has had his or her share of criticisms. I am being rather cautious here, because in some cases it was not just criticism but open attacks and so on, and she dealt with those. She also told me that Some people think that she's trying to cling on to the job endlessly. She said, I'm not trying to do that, but it's my responsibility to see that uh, a responsible person comes to do this work. And for her, that is, it was an important point. Um, we have her book, uh, a number of her books, but the last one is called The World Around Us, basically consisting of selected editorials in the Theosophist, in which she didn't speak only about theosophy, but also the contemporary world, the cruelty to animals, the plight to animals around the world, the plight of refugees, and uh, the desecration of nature, uh, um, the illnesses of materialism gone rogue, and so on and so forth. So it's a very important book. She has other small books like Beauty, Truth, and Goodness, and so on. No Other Path to Go. But there is a book that had an impact on the TS worldwide, and it's called Human Regeneration. It consists of talks she gave at the International Theosophical Center in Naarden in July 1990. I had the opportunity to attend some of them, and she she went into the matter of the work of the TS very deeply. I still remember that when she was talking about the first object of the Theosophical Society, she looked at the audience in a very vigorous way and she said, the first object of the Theosophical Society implies a mind without barriers. That's what universal brotherhood is, according to the great theosophical teachers like Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant, and so on. A mind without barriers. And I stay with that for a while. The organization of the program was very interesting because she would give a talk in the morning that was followed by group study because she had suggested some handouts. And then in the afternoon, we would have a plenary session with her where questions would be submitted to her and she would answer. A number of stalwarts of the TS were there, including Anthony Hoskins, Hugh Sherman, uh, to whom the society owes a great deal for the width and openness of his writings. Members from other countries as well. And then the book was published. It has now been translated into several languages. Like it happens to every human being, she did experience health problems towards the end of her life. She had a stroke in November 2006. Um, some people came to the conclusion that she shouldn't be the president anymore. But the constitution of the TS uh, allows a person to be nominated. And if that person has the sufficient number of votes, that person can be elected. Um, anyhow, I was there during those last years, and she really suffered, and um, she had a number of problems, heart problems as well. But then she would recover and she would continue her work. And um, we were at a convention planning meeting once, um, and she said to Linda Oliveira, who was working there at that time. She said, "You have to be prepared. Death comes in a moment," which is absolutely true. We didn't know what was going to happen. The fact is that she improved, her health improved, um, and she continued the work that she could do, and she had a great deal of help with her from her secretary, Mrs. Bernice Croft from New Zealand, who did a lot of work to help her in many ways, including accompanying her all the way to Wheaton a couple of years before she died for some theosophical talks at the center of the American section. Um, I was with Linda at in Bali. We are going to have an Indo-Pacific conference. We had just come back from our room. We were about to start breakfast when a member from New Zealand informed us the news that Radha Burnier had passed away. So we rushed back to the room, and we sent messages of condolences to Adyar and so on. There was before the conference started, there was also a memorial meeting for her. And then, while arriving at Adyar, I came to know of what happened. She asked the general manager to visit her in the morning. And she said to him that she wouldn't be there for the convention this year, that means 2013. This was 31st October 2013. And she asked him to make sure that everything was all right. And she said, "Please come and see me tonight at 9 p.m." And there was a young woman, the daughter of one of our workers at Adyar, who was keeping company with Radha Burnier at night. And when she arrived at Parsi Quarters where she lived, she found her on the floor and she had the telephone in her hand. So she immediately raised the alarm. Her doctor came and the general manager came. And then it was established that she had died. And a number of procedures were put in place. And the general manager told me that in her coffee table, full of books and magazines that she used to read, she was an avid reader, there was a scribble in a very shaky handwriting, her handwriting, in Sanskrit, not in English. And this scribbling, this message said, "He who is devoted to me, come to me." And this is believed to be her last statement. It was a great privilege to know her, and I remember we had a World Congress in Brasilia in 1993. There was a press conference before the Congress, and an editor of a Brazilian magazine specializing in occult and spiritual subjects asked to ask a question, and he was allowed to ask a question. And he said, "I have studied in the occult diary leaves that the leadership of the TS at that time was in constant contact with the masters. What I want to know is, what is the current contact with the masters by the leadership of the TS, and Mrs. Burnier particularly, what is your contact with the masters?" Now, I had to translate this from Portuguese into English. And I said, this is going to be difficult, but I translated to the best of my ability. And then Radha Burnier listened to the question translated into English, and she was silent for a short while, and then she said, consider that there is a couple for whom their relationship is almost sacred. Would they talk about it? The relationship with the master is much sacred than that, and therefore one doesn't say anything. And that was the end of the conference. And this is one of the keynotes of her presidency. She never spoke personally about the masters. She never make any hint about her occult statement. She continued her work and uh, and died in the service of the society. Thank you, Erica.